winter series of lectures. Before we get started, I have to go over a little bit of housekeeping. Please turn your cell phones off. If you need to use the restroom, you're free to do so anytime during a presentation. It's right out here along with a water fountain. We want to really thank Mickey Hummel tremendously. Mickey is in this corner. Mickey started helping us do presentations and has been helping us for more than 15 years. And we would not be able to do these during the winter if we didn't, in addition to wearing his town council hat, he's an IT guru. But now, according to Mickey, there's someone that's even more efficient at IT than him, and he's hiding in the back box. Kevin, put your little head out so everybody can see you. And we want to thank both of them for making this possible, because in addition to you being able to enjoy the talk today, this is the first time that we're streaming it. They're always YouTubed, and technology just makes it so much more pleasant for anybody in the audience to enjoy watching whatever is presented. I want to remind you that on March 22nd, 2 Sundays from now, is our last lecture, and that one will also be special because it's John Tippett, one of our own, and he's with the North Beach Volunteer Fire Department, and this is their 100th year anniversary. So his talk is going to be really interesting because he's covering 100 years of our wonderful North Beach Volunteer Fire Department. Today's talk is about North Beach. At the end of the talk, if you weren't able to get one of the books that were written by myself and Vincent, they'll be available in the back, and we take cash or check for $25. Now it is a real honor and privilege to introduce Vincent P. Turner II, as his father is sitting in the audience, and we have to keep all of these Turner guys separated. Vincent graduated from the University of Maryland with a Master's of Historic Preservation in the spring of 2024. He earned his bachelor's in history from St. Mary's College and an AA in history from the College of Southern Maryland. He grew up in Calvert County. He's worked for the Bayside History Museum since 2013. His first job was to digitize documents and make records for objects in the museum collections. Since that time, he worked his way up to collections manager and vice president of the museum. He has conducted 3 architectural surveys of North Beach, and he's currently working on a project to document each property in the town. Vincent recently began working full-time for EHT Traceries, which is located in Washington, D.C., as their historic preservation specialist. Last year, he co-authored 2 books, The North Beach Yesterday and Today, and Camp Chesapeake. So it's been, on a personal note, it's been a real honor to watch this young man who started working for us in high school grow, go to college, become married, and he's just such a wonderful, productive human being for the community. It's an honor to introduce you, Vincent.
I don't know how I'm going to follow that. Well, just want to say thank you for being here today. This project is a culmination of 6 years of work. I've been working on this basically in all of my free time, on top of sleeping and, trying to maintain a social life, and then working in school and everything else, as you just heard. I just want to say that, it's been an honor working for the Bayside History Museum. They've taught me everything that I know, and I love history, and I love sharing it with people. So I'm glad that I can share it with all of you and for everybody who's going to watch the recording later. This project, like I said, started about 6 years ago. I learned about, chains of title and how to do deed research, and it can be pretty complicated. And one of the ways that I wanted to give back to the community of North Beach for, helping me pay for college, basically, was doing projects that would make it easier for the residents and former residents and really anybody who's interested in history to have access to those things. So about 6 years ago, I sat down for an entire summer, so it was middle COVID, 2020 right there, and I read all of the Calvert County deed books from 1900 to 1962. It was about 100,000 pages of deeds. And then I made abstracts. I pulled out that information. I made it so it'd be easy for people to read through instead of having to read the old cursive, because some of these clerks have the worst handwriting you've ever seen in your life. So I sat down and I just typed it all out. And so it's all in Word documents, very easy for people to read. I also did a photo survey of North Beach in 2022. I was helped by Olivia and Griffin. They helped me take some photos. I actually had the police called on me by somebody because I was taking photos in the street of North Beach, and they're like, "Who's this suspicious looking guy?" As you can see, right? And one of the future projects is to combine that photo survey with all of this deed research. That way we can have basically files on all of the properties. So if anybody ever moves to town or they're curious about, hey, what did my house used to look like or who used to own it, it will all be ready and available to them. I also want to thank Catherine Couchman, who couldn't be here today, because she helped me organize a lot of these files. She actually broke out all of my research into the separate lots and blocks, and then from there I helped to build the chains of title, basically from 1900 to December 2025. So they are the most recent that I could possibly make it before we publish this. This photo that you can see here on the top is probably one of my favorite photos of North Beach. It is quite likely the oldest photo of North Beach. It's taken somewhere around 1901, 1902. And it shows basically how the shoreline used to look. I mean, can you imagine? There used to be grass there, and there's a whole road, and there's a beach and everything. And if you go there, where do I need to click this? Ah, there we go. That's what it looks like today. That photo that you were just looking at there, that's what it looks like today. So you can see there's been so much change here in North Beach and so much turnover and ownership. And it was complicated, so I wanted to make it easy for people to be able to learn about this history. So this is a brief little table of contents for my presentation today. I'm going to give you the briefest history of North Beach I can, because let me tell you, I could ramble for an hour on that. Including some of the earliest sale ads. I have the earliest sale and mortgage, because I know you guys are curious about that. Some of the other cool findings that I came across in the research. How to use the database, very important. And then the deeds index, which is a future project that I'm working on. And then last, we're going to end with trivia. So I hope you guys are excited. You engage your brains, because I got some really good questions, and I think you're going to be surprised and really excited about this. Maybe. There we go. All right. So our timeline history of North Beach here. You can look at any of these three screens. They're all the same, I promise. That one's up there so that way I can look at it instead of going, The things that are bolded here are what I believe are, some of the most critical events to occur in the history of North Beach. So the founding of Chesapeake Beach is actually very important, because if Chesapeake Beach wasn't here, North Beach wouldn't be here. And basically what happened is some investors from Colorado came in and they decided to build a resort. So they were going to build Chesapeake Beach there. And there were other investors in DC and Prince George's County who saw that and decided they could make money too. So they decided to make North Chesapeake Beach. And then they incorporated a company in 1900, laid out the town. This is actually, this plat here on the right side, it is a plat map of 1900 North Beach. So you can see all the lots laid out. Nice little bell shape. Kind of reminds me of a Liberty Bell almost. In 1908, they replatted the town. So it looks, there we go. So they cut up a lot of lots. They basically went from 50 by 150 feet to 25 by 150 feet. So they cut them in half so you could sell them for cheaper, and then you also had more lots to sell so you could get more money. North Beach was incorporated, of course, in 1910, very important here. The legalization of gambling in Calvert County. Basically, gambling existed here before it was legal. There were slot machines, there were games of chance, there was lots of stuff that was not so great because North Beach, Chesapeake Beach used to be kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So there's not a lot of supervision. But the legalization of gambling meant that then all of a sudden you could have all of these devices throughout the town. And as new resorts opened up, Ocean City in 1933, they got the inlet, and it's suddenly exploded in popularity. So a lot of people started going there, going to other places. Gambling really became the mainstay of North Beach and sustained it for the next several decades. 1968 was the outlaw of gambling in Maryland, and North Beach essentially died. I mean, that was the mainstay of the economy. They basically had liquor stores and bars for a long, long time. If there's actually probably a few folks here, remember, if you're saying you're going to North Beach back then, they're like, oh, you're looking for trouble. Okay. But then in the 1990s, they started cleaning up and basically revitalizing the town. And now, North Beach is known as the jewel of the Chesapeake, as you've probably seen on some of the signs around here. And it's just such a wonderful place, a place where the museum can thrive, where the community can engage, and we can have these kinds of talks and, you know, learn about our past. All right. So these are some of the earliest sale ads for North Beach. That top left and the right side there, those are actually from the North Chesapeake Beach Land and Improvement Company. And they're basically saying, hey, come down here. We have this cool resort. We're building a hotel. I mean, you can look at some of the different luxuries that they have listed on there. You also have some private sales there on the bottom left, which are, you know, other people who had bought lots and then they're going to resell it to make money. And then in the middle there is a society page. Now, we don't have those in newspapers anymore, but back then, basically, this is how you figured out what your friends were doing for the summer. So you would have these lists of like, oh, you know, Miss Sarah Parker, she's going to come down and occupy a cottage. Oh, well, I'm going to go visit my friend Sarah Parker. You know, you read that in the newspaper. So it also served as this basically free advertising. You know, people told the newspaper, this is what I'm doing, and then the company didn't have to pay for a whole nother ad. And then you're dragging your friends with you and, you know, basically having a good time. So this was really the primary means for you know, selling these lots, because they didn't have TVs back then, you know, and they didn't, you know, they couldn't just pop up on my smartphone and look at, oh, real estate listings on, you know, homes.com or something. So you would use these ads to stir interest, primarily in Washington, D.C., but there were also several, you know, real estate campaigns in Baltimore as well. So those are your big metropolitans that you're trying to draw down here. Maybe towards you. All right. Now, to our earliest sale here in North Beach. On the right side there, that is a digital copy of that very first sale. And that handwriting is actually not too bad. There's way worse out there, I promise. So you could probably read that if you know how to read cursive. But I did pull up an example here. So if you look on the left side, this is what a transcript of that looks like. So when you look at this deed research project, this is essentially the most important information out of all of those words that you see. So you can see the very first sale for North Beach, June 23rd, 1900. That's pretty early. And it was to a guy named Robert Plum. Now, Robert Plum was incredibly hard to track down. There is not a lot of information about this guy. I'm hoping in the future maybe I'll have some more time to see if I can, you know, do some genealogy work. But I actually did find his obituary from 1915, and this had some pretty interesting information. Turns out he was an immigrant from the Russian Empire. He moved to Washington, D.C. in 1895, and he was a pretty famous tailor in the city. He definitely had money when he came down here, which points to a very interesting you know, fact, is that North Beach was actually a very luxurious resort when it started. A lot of the high society people in D.C. bought lots down here and built cottages to basically escape out of, you know, the city for the summer. Because back then, no air conditioning, D.C. was pretty miserable. But down here, you're right here on the waterfront, you get fresh salt water is what they used to advertise, fresh air, vegetables from local farms. So it was pretty luxurious back then. All right. Now, this is where that very first lot is. I'm sure you recognize that pink building there on the right side, right? So it's right there on that corner. This postcard's from like 1930 or so. It's from the 1930s, basically. So where that red arrow is pointing, that's that early cottage. That's that first sale. And then right to the left, there's the Calvert Hotel, which was built by the North Chesapeake Beach Land and Improvement Company. So that was the company hotel where, you know, you can come and stay. And you can see that that Robert didn't really hold on to the lot that long. He only held it for a little over a year and a half. I'm not sure why. Maybe in the future I'll be able to pull some of that info out of the depths of history, but for now, this is what we have. Now, earliest mortgage. I'm sure you guys are very interested in this, right? On the right side there is, again, a digital copy of the earliest mortgage that I could find. And then on the left side are the transcripts from basically the sale. So John N. Beck, buys it August 18th, 1900. And then he takes out 2 mortgages, basically. So combined, it's about $1,000 or so. So not too bad. I did have, yeah, about $1,000. So not too bad now, but that translates to roughly like $33,000 today. That's a lot of money back then. So you had to be rich to buy some of these lots down here in North Beach. And again, this is where that lot was. So if you look on this postcard here on the left side, right, that's the cottage. It's next to the Cleveland Hotel. That's that 2-story building right to the side there. And you'll notice it looks a little different than the house that's there today. And that's because the Cleveland Hotel caught on fire in 1935 and took the cottage next to it. So this is a rebuilt cottage here. It's not quite the same, but it is the same location. And you can see down there on the bottom, the poor John Beck defaulted on his mortgage, so they sold it out from underneath of him. Well, that's a pretty expensive mortgage for back then, But I just thought that was kind of fascinating. I was like, both of these and the original cottage isn't still around. Okay. This is something that I wanted to make sure was covered in this talk. Racial covenants were basically restrictions that were tied to the land. They started emerging really in the early 20th century with redlining and with trying to keep basically black people or Jewish people or anybody who wasn't white and a lot of times Protestant from moving into certain areas. So North Beach was a sundown town for a long time, for several decades. And I was able to track down through this deed research when they began inserting this racial covenant into their deeds. And this top left here, so it shows you the transcript of basically that deed on the right side, where this is one of the last deeds that I could find that didn't have the racial covenant in it. And the one below is actually the earliest instance I could find of it actually written into a deed. So the transition happened sometime between 1907 and 1908. Well, North Beach was replatted in 1908, and it was incorporated in 1910. So it's very likely that this covenant was inserted because the town was incorporating, because it was going to become a municipality, and they wanted this to run with the land. So I included transcripts here basically of where this clause was inserted, and it's kind of just haphazard. They just kind of slid it in there in between. You can see really where that transition is. They just slip it right in between the no place of amusement. But it's very powerful. It speaks to what the people back then thought. So this covenant, of course, is initiated in 1908. And then actually racial covenants were made unenforceable by the Supreme Court in 1948. There was a whole big Supreme Court case out of St. Louis about this. And basically, you couldn't enforce these laws. However, they did continue to run with the land, and you can actually find them still included on deeds afterwards. You just legally couldn't because then you could get sued. Now, some of the cool stuff that I found in this research were things like articles of incorporation. So basically, companies were like, hey, I'm going to incorporate down here in North Beach. So this one here I picked because it's about the library, or an early library, I should say. The Hayes Library Incorporated, John Hayes, he was president of the North Chesapeake Beach Land Improvement Company up until his death in 1944. So he was in there for about 2 decades or so. And I found this incorporation paper, and it's like the first thing we ever heard about this library. And through my research, I was able to figure out that basically it was here. I think it was on that bottom right side. There was a lot of different stores that were in there. There was a barber shop in there. There was a liquor store. There was a lot of different things over the years. But I think it's in the bottom corner of this building here, which is probably familiar to you guys because it's literally right across the street. All right. Another cool thing that I found, inventories of hotels. These things tended to go bankrupt, and when you were selling them off, you had to take inventories of all the stuff in there to make sure nobody was stealing anything. So this is an inventory of the North Chesapeake Beach Land Improvement Company's hotel from 1954, and they went room by room describing all of the furniture in there. I mean, that is an incredible look at how these places were furnished back then. And I found several different inventories like this. And I've just wanted to share this. I will say this here, I did not type out every inventory. I just put the reference there so you can go and look this up on your own. I did do some comprehensive other stuff, but it wasn't typing out all the inventories. Now, Franchi's Restaurant, I'm sure some of you guys remember Franchi's. It used to be right down the street here. This was another inventory, so an inventory of a restaurant. I found a couple of different inventories of restaurants over the years. It's interesting to see what they would have had. And unfortunately for Franchi's, a tractor trailer ran into it in '92, and then they had to tear it down in '95. So now it's that empty lot right up the street here, the corner of 3rd and Chesapeake. Cottages. This was incredibly rare, to find an inventory of a cottage, room by room, telling me what was inside. I mean, there's so many people that don't really keep track of that. I mean, do you know, like, what's in your spare bedroom? You know, do you know what's in your master bedroom? What kind of furniture? No, nobody keeps track of that. It's your day-to-day. So most people, when they were visiting here, they didn't pay attention to that either. So this provides a really good picture of what a cottage, you know, would have been furnished with in the 1950s and probably before. You know, this furniture was probably around for a while. In this particular house, I don't think it's the original based on this Sanborn map here. This is a Sanborn map from 1930. I highlighted the lot with it. It's a 1-story cottage, and as you can see, this is a 2-story building, but that's future research, so maybe I'll figure it out. But basically, I mean, it provides a really good idea of what these were furnished with. Okay. Lease agreements. There weren't a lot of these that I uncovered, but there were enough that provided really cool looks into, you know, North Beach's history here. So there's a tiny copy of the lease agreement up there. I took a screenshot of it just to show you what one of those, you know, would have looked like. The North Beach filling station was located basically where the town center apartments are, where that main entrance is. It was basically like right to the right side of where that currently is today. And there's a historic photograph of basically Main Street, North Beach. And you can see the sign there and some of those gas pumps and some of the old cars. So I thought it was really cool that I could match up, you know, a historic photo and say, okay, so I know that this was probably taken sometime in the 1930s based on this information. A lease agreement for a cottage. Now, this was really cool because lease agreements between you know, cottage owners and the people who are renting them doesn't always make it into these records. So to find something that actually tells me you know, how much these cottages were renting for is incredibly invaluable. And something that I loved about this is that this is actually one of the last few original cottages still on the waterfront. Hurricane Isabel did a real number on the town when it blew through. It demolished a lot of these waterfront little cottages. So the fact that this one still survives and we can look at it and then we can go back and see, oh, you know, they were, you know, leasing it for $600 in the 1920s. I think that's pretty cool. And also, I included a little fun fact down there at the bottom, if you can see. It's completely furnished, including a piano. I mean, that's pretty cool for the beaches, right? 1920s, come down and play some piano. And you can see who they leased it to, right? The Court District of Columbia, number 212, Catholic Daughters of America. North Beach used to be a pretty big resort for a lot of religious organizations and other places up in D.C. They would come down and rent these cottages, basically to allow, you know, families to get out for the summer. Does anybody remember Sanitary Grocery? If you do, you're probably like 90 or 100. So Sanitary Grocery actually was a regional grocery chain. It was started by a guy named John Letts in 1908 in Bethesda, Maryland. And he actually had a number of stores in D.C. and Maryland. They were bought out by Safeway in 1928. They were allowed to keep their name up until about 1941, and they all became Safeways. So you are familiar with Safeways at least, right? Probably not the Sanitary. Sanitary was also notorious for buying out Piggly Wiggly grocery stores, which is why it's included in these restrictions here. I thought these were pretty fascinating. There's no other instances I came across where they're like, you cannot put a specific kind of store on a certain location. And then on the bottom there, you can see the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. So that name might be familiar too. If you look close enough at this photograph, you can see where Sanitary is, right? Just 2 doors down is the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. So rival grocery stores just door to door facing off. So you can see there's a lot of rivalry down here for North Beach. All right. And this is where that was located. So again, with Town Center Apartments there. Right across the street. Okay. North Beach Amusement Company. Originally, the amusements down here were run by the North Chesapeake Beach Land and Improvement Company. They spun it off into a separate organization in 1935, and they created Uncle Billy's, which is pretty famous. It lasted for quite a while. It was sold to Charles Nelson, 1961. Now, Charlie Nelson is a notorious figure in North Beach. He was actually raided by the FBI because he was running a gambling ring between D.C. and Maryland, and he had slot machines where he shouldn't have had slot machines. It was a whole big mess. They actually came down and raided Uncle Billy's one time to get information on him. But if you look, this is where it is today. Unfortunately, that little snack stand and the fencing's all gone, and they're going to redevelop it. So we'll see what the next future iteration of this is. Oscar Marshall's Crab House. Now, if you go down to the boardwalk, you're probably familiar with that mural, right? So I included some nice historic photos there for you. I came across, there was only one lease that I came across from Oscar Marshall, but it talks about it's been there since 1915, which, it proves finally, the oral histories that were like, oh yeah, it was like 1915, 16 when they built that thing out there. I don't recall. A lot of people, when they did their oral histories, they were kids, and, kids aren't the best at remembering all the dates when they're building stuff, right? So this proves, that this was there. Oscar Marshall's lasted until 1933. There's a huge hurricane that came right up the Chesapeake and actually destroyed that entire boardwalk. So he moved on to the land, and then 1939, he actually bought the same lot where the Southwinds is, that corner lot that was the first one sold. He actually bought that and then moved his restaurant into there. So it's a very busy corner over there. Now, you may not know this, but it turns out that the American Legion Post was actually incorporated here in North Beach originally. So it wasn't always Chesapeake Beach. And they actually owned a property here in the town. So I highlighted that with that little red box there. It was just a little cottage. It was probably just some place for them to hang out, and it was right behind a liquor store, so, you could come hang out with your buddies and go down on the beach. It was a pretty good time, right? Up until they built, the American Legion Post that we all know and love today. All right. And if you look, this is where it is today. It's actually the back end of the apartment buildings there. So, unfortunately, it did not survive. Murphy Hotel, so it's that corner building. I keep bringing it up over and over. Another important architectural landmark in North Beach. I found the Articles of Incorporation for the Hotel Murphy. It definitely existed before 1952, but I just don't have the incorporation papers. So I'm not sure why they redid it. Maybe it was new owners. Maybe there's some kind of tax issues. So you can see, even though I have lots of information, I also have lots more questions. But something that I thought was cool in this mortgage from 1948, it actually talks about the addition that they put onto the back of the hotel that you can see there in that bottom photo. Unfortunately, once businesses really stopped operating in there, it was actually a Marlowe Furniture for about 20-ish years or so. After Mr. Glickfield died, they closed it down and it was basically abandoned. And the back end of the building became so degraded that they had to demolish it. So it was torn off sometime in the late 1990s, early 2000s. So now you just have the front end of the building there today. But I'm so glad that they at least saved that early part of the hotel. All right. Stone's Motel. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the little apartment building there. That's what it used to look like when it was first built in the 1950s. I mean, isn't that pretty cool? It used to be one story. I have no idea when they put that second story on. Maybe I'll come across like a construction application permit, something like that. It'll help flesh out the story there. But you can see in this mortgage, that Thelma and Emmett Stone were actually advanced $25,000 on this mortgage, and I think it was used to build this motel because we actually do have a building permit from 1954 for this motel. So it just helps to reinforce all of this stuff going on and really put in these dates. Okay. Now, this is a very, very important part of North Beach history. Something we all take for granted today because we have septic tanks, we have modern sewage and all that. Before 1959, everybody had an outhouse down here. And you had to have somebody come by and scoop it out, and then they would just dump it in the swamp. I'm sure it smelled delightful in the summertime. I mean, just incredible, right? So actually, Robert S. Mead, so he was mayor down there, he was very instrumental in getting a sewage system for North Beach. And you can see in the top right photo there, that's what it looked like. So nothing glorious, but it did help to basically modernize the beaches. And what I found really cool while going through these deeds are these basically agreements from the town where people who technically weren't inside the town limits could connect to the sewer system because they realized that, hey, even if everybody in the town is on a sewer system, the people outside matter too because they're going to keep dumping their stuff in the swamp. So if we let them connect, then, we don't have that issue anymore. So I just thought that these were kind of fascinating, showing that progression in history, and it lines up perfectly with when they opened the sewage system in the town. Okay. So here's some unusual findings. This stuff was really cool. The deed books from like 1900 to 1916, they included a lot of like properties. So there's actually tobacco sales that are included in here. So I found this sale of tobacco because North Beach actually used to be a farm. It was a working tobacco farm until they started turning it into a resort. And this actually proves that. This says, hey, we're selling our tobacco up to Baltimore. And then this is the only instance that I found that was recorded in the deed books. But it's very likely that this continued maybe up until like the 1920s when the town really started, building out. I just thought it was fascinating. And it really shows, Calvert County's history. I mean, after all, we have a tobacco leaf on our flag. All right. Now, well, go back one more. There we go. All right. This was cool. So early automobiles were incredibly expensive. So you can see down there a mortgage for $1,100. That's a lot of money back then. I did have all the calculations out, but I'm not going to throw numbers at you. You can do inflation calculators from home. But think of it roughly as like $30,000-ish, $40,000, somewhere in that range for an automobile. And this guy actually mortgaged his house to purchase this automobile, and here it is in the records. So the Chalmers touring car, so that is, yeah. That's a photo of what one of those looks like there. So imagine paying $33,000 for that back in 1912. And again, there's that same cottage. Do you recognize that one from before that had the lease agreement and everything on it? So you mortgaged that property to say, hey, I want to buy a touring car to bring people basically from Chesapeake Beach, from the railroad, up to this cottage, is what I believe this was used for. Transportation back then, a lot of it was like oxen carts, so very rugged back and forth. There was a railroad company eventually. I'm actually going to get to that next. So yeah, let's go right to that. So the North Beach Railway Company is probably the more familiar term, but it turns out it was actually incorporated as the Bayshore Railway Company, and they had plans to build a railroad from Chesapeake Beach all the way up to Fairhaven. I mean, that was pretty ambitious for back then because there was basically dirt roads, oyster shell roads, nothing going on. Now, they never quite got that far. They kept running out of money. I mean, railroads are pretty expensive to run up. You can see a mortgage for $3,000 there, so that's roughly $98,000 today. That's a pretty expensive vehicle there. But the North Beach Railway Company, they ran the Toonerville Trolley. There's a pretty familiar postcard down there on the bottom. They originally had like an actual train engine, and then that died because they bought it used. And so they used this tractor to push it around, and then they were trying to like power it with like power lines for a while, and it didn't quite work out. So a lot of stumbling back and forth. And then that top right photo there, that's the vehicle that was mentioned in that last mortgage. So cars, just a little bit more reliable back then. All right. Now, I tried to make this as like easily as you could see, it didn't quite work out, but you can kind of see the different colors of the roads on here. This is a United States Geologic Survey map from 1938. I actually came across a state roads commission, basically where they came down to North Beach and they said, hey, we're going to extend 5th Street out to Boyd's Turn Road and go up to Paris, which you can see on the left side of the map there. Because back then it actually didn't used to connect. There's a farm road that's a solid black line you can see going through the top. There's a yellow dotted line, which is a dirt road going through. So I believe that the State Roads Commission actually came in and they paved it out and basically gave us the 5th Street extension, which we all know today. And then that orange line, sort of in the center there, was an old road that used to connect North Beach down to Chesapeake Beach. It was basically like taken out when they started subdividing it and they put all the subdivision, the houses back there. But there did used to be a lot closer connection between the towns. Now, electrification. This is a really cool topic. There's a book from Smecco that talks about a lot of the early stuff going on down here in Southern Maryland. I used it for another project of mine. Basically, what happened was before 1929, cottages, businesses, what have you, they would use generators. They would, gasoline-powered generators, diesel generators, what have you, and that would provide the electricity. I actually came across a mortgage, which mentioned a specific brand of generator that was used down here. I thought that was fascinating. And in 1929, there was a huge court battle between basically the predecessor of Smecco and the predecessor of BG&E, where they sued each other over the rights to run power lines down to North and Chesapeake Beach. Ultimately, BG&E won because they were a bigger company, and they ran the lines down in 1929. And the world became a little bit smaller here. We finally got electricity. All right. There actually used to be a school here in North Beach. A lot of people don't know that. Unless you read Mary Rockefeller's very excellent book on the education in Calvert County. I highly recommend it. But I did come across these deeds where the County Board of Education, they bought a lot, and that's the house there today. I actually think that's the original schoolhouse. It looks like it could be, right? The school closed in 1917, but they didn't end up selling it later, until later, to basically pay for the Twin Beaches School, which they built where the fire department is today. There used to be several different sawmills in North Beach. They were just portable devices, like you can see here. I mean, not too crazy. One guy's not going to carry it around, but you could use the oxen to move these things. They were moved down by ship from Baltimore on the rail line. And the company, the North Chesapeake Beach Land Improvement Company, and several private individuals, they had their own sawmills that they would run. So you could buy a lot down here, and then you could get the guy to basically cut down the lumber and then turn it into stuff that you could use to build your cottage, which I think is pretty dang efficient, so you don't have to ship so much in. This is actually a lease agreement from 1915, so another early lease here. But I thought that was kind of cool. All right. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering, how are you going to use this database? It is very complicated. It is gigantic, but I tried to make it as user-friendly for anybody that I possibly could. We're still working on this. Our website developer, I handed this project to him, and his eyebrows kind of just went. So it's going to take a little while. We're hoping maybe the end of May. I won't give you a solid date. I'm not sure, but we're working on it. I promise. It's all done. We just have to get it onto the website. But basically what's going to happen is you come to the Bayside History Museum homepage, which you can see there on the right side. So that red arrow goes to collections. And basically what will happen is you'll come to the collections page, and then it'll be identity of a small town and a blue highlight, hyperlink. And when you click on it, it'll look like on the left side here. So this is an example of what this page will look like. All of this will be organized by the modern address. So I'm not going to do like lot part of 1 from block 26, because who knows where the heck that is, right? But you know where the address is. That's super easy to go through. And you'll click, there'll be hyperlinks, and when you click on it, so for example, that top right there, 4025 4th Street, just happy to put that on there. It'll bring you to a page that looks like this. This is the finished product of the identity of a small town. This is a complete history of this particular address, this location. And you'll notice it's the North Beach Volunteer Fire Department, because they used to have a fire department down here. And I didn't choose it because the museum is there today. That's total coincidence. But you can see it's organized chronologically, so it starts with the most recent and then goes all the way to the end. And then at the bottom, you get to no further deed references. There actually are references beyond that, but they're a little complicated, and I'm still working out how to best present that to the public. But basically, it goes back to the North Chesapeake Beach Land Improvement Company when they first sold that particular lot, which is generally what most people need. Then the company owns it, and then you can go further back. We actually have records of North Beach going back to 1817, so I think that's pretty dang cool. That'll come out as a whole separate project, so don't worry about that for the moment. Just worry about for right here, right now. All right. Now, what you're looking at with this page, right? I'm going to break down that top entry, basically. So what you're looking at is the date. I did the date the transaction was made. A lot of people include that and then when the date it was recorded, because sometimes people didn't immediately go to the courthouse to record these. They held on to them for a number of years for any number of reasons. A lot of these transactions were actually made in Washington, D.C. at the company office. And could you imagine in like 1905, you go and buy a lot, and then you have to try and get down to the courthouse in Prince Frederick? There was like no single road you would go down. It's all dirt roads. You have to go through farmers' fields and through gates and paddocks and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'm sure a lot of these early, purchases, they were recorded several years later. But just to keep it easy, what would happen is if you looked up this particular deed, it would say, on this day, February 19th, 1977, yada, 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 right? And it's just easier for people to understand that's when this was made. The years are all pretty accurate. Although if it was lacking that information, I did go and put the recorded in, but that was very few and far in between. So basically, it's the date the transaction was made, and then next is the deed book reference. This is what you would need to look up this information. The Maryland Land Records, they actually have a site, the Maryland State Archives. They have a whole website dedicated just to deeds, and they have it for the entire state. Maryland's actually the only state that has all of their county deed books on one page that you can access online for free. So, fun fact. What you're looking at with these basically, the first three letters there, the JLB, are the initials of the clerk of the circuit court for Calvert County at the time. And that's followed by the Lieber and folio numbers. Now, that's just an old way of saying the book number and the page number. So you go to book 210, page 6, and this deed would pop up for you. These are the initials for the clerks of the circuit court as relates to this particular project. These are all available online. I found this from a web page from the Maryland State Archives, actually, and I just pulled this out. So this is what the initials would look like on some of those deeds, going far enough back. The initials don't always correspond with the clerks, and I don't know why. As you can see, there's like AAH for Alan W. Ross, and then all of a sudden it switched to AWR, but Harkness came back in. So I'm not sure why that happened. And then Kathy P. Smith down there at the end, they actually, in the early days, they would restart the books every time a new clerk came in. So you could have book 1 for George Dowell, and then you could have book 1 for Arthur Harkness, and so on and so forth. But with Audrey B. Evans, they actually just kept doing the book numbers. So Kathy P. Smith, I think the most recent book that I looked at was like 6,650 or something like that. So that's how many deed books since roughly 1955 that they've had. And these things range anywhere from 300 pages to like 900 pages long. They are pretty extensive. But don't have to worry about that. You just need to know the initials. All right. Let's see. Okay. Next up is the grantee and the grantor. So it's the people doing these transactions. If you've bought property, you're pretty familiar with these terms. But I tried to keep it so that the person that was doing the action is on the top line. There's mortgagers and mortgagees and vendors and vendees and lessors and lessees. So the person that was doing the transacting, the person that was doing something, I tried to keep them at the top. So that's the first person that you would read on there. If it isn't, I apologize. This is a very big project. If you do notice errors, by the way, please send it to the museum and we will try to correct that as soon as we can. And then the last is the abstract. Now, quite a few of these were very easy. Some people just bought like lot 1 and block 3, and it just remained that from 1900 all the way up to the present day, and it made my life so easy. But as you can see on the right side there, sometimes it got a little complicated where they would sell parts of lots. And I actually went and I typed out all of the directions that were included on those deeds word for word. I looked over this entire project 3 times to make sure that these were all accurate. However, there may still have been one that slipped in here and there. But it does trace what the size of the lot was that was being transacted at the moment. And then this is an example of what one of those really complicated sales looks like. That is one entire tract of land. And so I sat down and just copied it all out so that would be easy for people to understand, because trying to follow all that is crazy. This is actually for Burnt Oaks Apartments. They sold it as one big parcel back when they were subdividing it and building it out. So I did actually go all the way up to Burnt Oaks and figure out what used to be there before. I will put a caveat and say that I figured out all of the lots for North Beach, the historic town limits, but I didn't figure out all of like the townhouses, apartments, and things in Burnt Oaks. That might be a future project, but this is really aimed at being historic, trying to figure out these cottages, So maybe in the future I'll come back to that. But for now, if you live in Burnt Oaks and you're curious about what used to be there before, that's what's going to help you out. All right. Now, this is the next step. This is something that I'm working on currently. It is an index. I should have made this when I was making these. I did not, because I figured I'd just come back and do it. Big mistake. If you're ever doing this in the future, do your index while you're making the actual deed chains of title. This will be explained in a future talk, I promise. I'm hoping to maybe have it done sometime by next year. I'm actually going to hire some help. Although, if you want to volunteer and help me make an index, I will not turn down any help. Basically, it'll have the names of the people on the transactions. It'll have the address, the deed book reference, the dates, basically what the title is. So you can see I included a little list up there to help you out. The place of origin, because a lot of these the people are from somewhere outside of Maryland. Found some pretty cool stuff. There's actually a person from Czechoslovakia who was included on one of these deeds. And then the notes are just some of the interesting stuff that sometimes gets thrown in there. So like eventually I'll put in the fully furnished includes piano in there, because I think that's kind of cool, right? And then the cost of the lots at the time. So in the transaction, if it mentions a money amount, I did throw that in there. And eventually we're going to work this out so it's the entire town. So you'd come to this first, you'd look up whatever name you wanted to look up or the address, and then you could go on from there. But this is going to take some work, so the future, I promise it's coming. All right. Future projects. Speaking of, the Bayside History Museum has all of these documents, resources, whatever you want to call them, in their collections. And these can be combined with these chains of title to help really flesh out what was going on here in North Beach. Back when I graduated from St. Mary's College, I wrote a huge history of North Beach from 1900 to 1970. Looking back at it now, I'm like, man, how did they ever let me graduate from there? I could write so much better nowadays. So I'm going to revisit that. We're actually going to write a big comprehensive history of North Beach, and that'll be like the bare bones outline of it. So we'll be able to pull all of that stuff together. But the reason I bring that up is I actually went through all of the Evening Star paper from Washington, D.C., all the Washington Post stuff that I could get a hold of, and look for every reference of North Beach that I could pull out of there. So for instance, if you look on the top right, you have a for sale from North Beach, a few lots. That's very helpful. Where the heck's that at? Well shaded, okay, so there's trees, near water. Great. That tells me nothing about where this is, right? By Edward Whitfield. I have no idea. You ever heard of Edward Whitfield before? I haven't. So, using this database, you can figure out where he bought these lots. And as you can see, it's right here, lots 1, 2, 18, 19, and 20 in block 5. And these are the modern day addresses I included right underneath there. So this is actually a series of photos that I took so I can show you what's there today. But it helps, basically when you have questions like this, where are these lots, where were these businesses, this is what it is. So that's there today. You guys know where that is, right? Yeah. All right, and then next to it, Vaughn Cheese, and we go Hook and Vine. So we're just going right up the street here, right? And then there's a little cottage here, the big cottage on the corner, and then a more modern day house on the backside. But these are all on those same lots that Edward Whitfield was selling in 1920. So these are some of the questions that can be answered using a database like this, and I think that's really dang cool. All right. Now, for the fun part, oh, this is going to be great. I hope you put your thinking caps on. This is some cool stuff. So, what is the least number of transactions for a property? Anybody can guess.
6.
One's a good answer. It's not quite right because that would be kind of crazy where like some person bought it and it's like stayed there. It's actually 2. So you're close though. You're close. And actually the town of North Beach is, they own way down at the end of Bay Avenue. There's like this little building that's kind of like in the swamp, like right at the edge of town when you go up on 261. So that's lot 6, right, or lot 9 there in block 6. So they've actually owned that for a long time. And the only people that owned it before were the company. So made it pretty easy. Although this other one was actually a private residence, and it was owned by the Marshall families, that Oscar Marshall's. His brother actually owned this and then sold it to somebody. It was actually sold out of the estate after he passed. So there's only been 2 people that have owned that one. All right. How about what is the longest one family has owned a property? So you can give me years here, like how long you think that's a pretty good answer.
What'd she say?
50.
48.
48, okay, that's pretty good. All right, yeah. I know, go a little under, right? All right. It's actually 103 years. A single family has owned a property here in North Beach for 103 years. And I found that out by doing this deed project. I mean, isn't that pretty cool? All right. How about which property owners have owned a property the longest in North Beach? Like who do you think owns or has owned it the longest? That's a good answer. Any guesses? You all know it. There you go. St. Anthony's, 1906. That's pretty dang early. They used to have this little, it was a cute little wooden church. They used to call it the Church in the Woods. All right, how about next oldest? It's right next door. The Union Church, 1914. All right, third one, last one, I promise. That's pretty good. You ready? North Beach Town Hall. They've owned this property since 1916. So it's basically all right up here on Main Street, on Chesapeake Avenue. All right. How many pages is the longest chain of title? No, not quite that high. Those are all pretty good answers. But it's actually 31. And it's for the town center apartments there right across the street. Since they own so many different parcels that were put together, it took a while to figure that one out. All right. This is one of my favorite questions. How many loans are taken out on the most mortgaged property in North Beach? And I promise it is nobody in this room. The people that took these out are long passed away. It was a while ago. All right. 17, and then the runner-up was 16, but I liked it because not one person took out 9 separate mortgages on their property. I don't know why. Maybe they had a business or something else going on, but I found that kind of fascinating. And then, for the penultimate question, how many pages would it take to print out this entire project? Remember, there's like 700 properties in North Beach, so each one has to be at least a page, right? Yeah, these are all pretty good guesses, but it's actually an even 2,600 pages long. That's how long this project is. So that's a little over 5 reams of paper. That's a lot of printing. And that's why I don't have a giant copy here to show you. It's all going to be digital. All right. And then last, time for questions. I really appreciate you guys being here, and I'm excited. All right. Yes.
Original cottage, say 1900. Oh.
Ooh, there we go.
The original cottage, like 1900 to 1920, and what was the average square foot of? Because I think in terms of a very small cottage, and then you're seeing the 2 stories, and then you're seeing the porches and the inventories and all that. Any part of that?
So It's hard to pinpoint how many original cottages are still left, because actually there was a fire in the courthouse in the left? Or about, oh, you mean originally? Now, that's also hard to pin down because a lot of the tax records, which would show improvements, have been lost. We were actually very fortunate to actually receive the tax records from the 1930s. They were in Thelma Robinson's old house in her attic, and they donated it to the museum. So we have all these 1930s tax records, so we could try and figure that out. Some of the early maps, those Sanborn maps that I showed you, would show approximately, but they don't show the entire town, unfortunately. So that question I don't have an answer to. There are a lot of things that we can try to maybe make a guess, an educated guess, but unfortunately I can't tell you for that very early stuff.
Because when you were showing the plots,
Mhm.
you could see where they cut them in half. And there's a number that do have double lots,
Yes.
you know, that are still there. So.
Yeah, so they started off with 50 by 150-foot square lots, and then they cut them in half, so it's 25, and then some later on had alleyways put in the back, so they were like 25 by 105 feet. So that's like your average sizes there. Okay, yes?
So the North Chesapeake Beach Land and Improvement Company, how did they come to own all this land to begin with?
That is an excellent question, and I'm so glad I did that research project back in 2019 to figure this out. The answer is, there was a guy, his name was Philemon Chu, so a very interesting name. The Chu family, they've been around for a long time. You can find them in Anne Arundel County records going back to the 1650s. So they've been here for a while. Basically what happened was there was a courthouse fire in Calvert County in the 1880s, burned all of the records, all of it gone. So unless you had a copy of your deed, you know, you had to go back down there and try and make it up again. There was a lot of back and forth over this. The guy that owned the property, he supposedly had a deed that showed that when he bought it, going back to 1845, and then I think that referenced a deed from 1817, which is how I can say the records go back that far, right? Well, Philemon Chu said, hey, my ancestors used to own this land. I don't know how you got it, but it should be mine. So he actually sued the farmer, and then won, and then the company took over the land and then started subdividing it out. They did pay the farmer like a marginal fee, but nowhere near the value that the town ended up being. Philemon. That's his first name. His last name is Chew, Chew. Yes. I don't know if that's how it's actually pronounced, but that's how I've always seen it written, and I've never met another Philemon, so I can't tell you. Chew's Branch. It's named after the family. All right, yes, question in the
Hi,
back.
did you get tax sales or liens?
No, I did not do liens. This was purely like a historic research thing. This was just to talk about chains of title and who used to be here. So you cannot use this as like a title search for if you're like selling a lot. You can't do that. I didn't search any kind of liens, any kind of mechanics liens, loans, whatever. If I found mortgages, I did include those, but it's not like legally contracting. You cannot use this for like legal purposes. This is purely for historic research. Good question, though. Yes.
I don't know if there's a quick and easy answer to this, but you know, the first time I came to this town, it's a North Beach, Chesapeake Beach, pretty small place. Why two separate towns?
Well, you have to think of the original companies that laid this out, right? Both of them wanted to make money. So the investors down in Chesapeake Beach, they bought several hundred acres and laid out a town, and they made they had a huge boardwalk used to be down there, hotel, casino, the works, right? And then the North Chesapeake Beach Land and Improvement Company, they wanted to make money as well. So they purchased, or well, as we heard, they sued and then purchased a farm that was pretty flat, and then they started laying out a resort. And you'll notice in the name, right, North Chesapeake Beach. They wanted to tie it to that franchise down there in Chesapeake Beach to say, hey, look, you know that big resort? Well, we're right next to it. So you come up here and you have your cottage and relax. You go down there for fun, and then in the evenings you come back up, and it's very much more suburban, you know. So the idea was that the companies just wanted to make money, so they were never going to combine together. It was just two separate interests.
So, but, I mean, there was no, okay, I mean, to me, it seems like if I was going to Chesapeake Beach, or Chesapeake Beach, first thing I would have done is annex Chesapeake Beach and thereby got the tax money or the rights to,
Well, once they incorporated, then it's a huge legal battle to do that, and nobody wanted to invest the money in doing that. I mean, if you're making, tens of thousands of dollars a year, and then all of a sudden you have to get a big court case that may drag out for years and, suck up all that money, you're probably not going to do that. So there really wasn't any incentive to combine either one. Okay. Yes?
I was just wondering if you have done or are planning to do any kind of assessment of how many of the homes in the area are full-time occupied and how many are rentals or beach vacation homes?
As in the modern sense or historic sense?
All the way through.
No. There is no way to figure that out because nope. Nope. There's nothing in the deeds about that. If somebody owns a property and they want to rent it out, that's something. I'm not sure what the whole process for that is, especially historically. There was a lot of instances where people own these and they rented them out for the summer if they couldn't come down. And there's no way for me to figure that out. So, but it is a good question, and I expected that, and that's why I had an answer. Yes, in the back.
Did you identify cemeteries and graveyards?
Interesting question. There were no graveyards that I came across in any of the references. I've looked at maps going back to the early 1800s. There's nothing on any of those references about graves or things of that nature. However, I do know that people have died here in North Beach. There's newspaper accounts about it, people washing up on shore and being buried somewhere. Now, with erosion, that means they're probably far out into the bay at this point. But as far as I understand it, there were no historic cemeteries here. Good question, though.
Have you done any address towards the patterning of the sales with, say, the national and state economic woes and highs and lows? Have you integrated it with the patterns of the economy?
I did not for this project, but it is something that I can do in the future.
Yeah.
One of the things is that I wanted to complete this because there's so many different things that you can do with this kind of data.
Yeah,
You
right.
can match it to things like that.
Social
Although-
interaction and so
Right.
forth.
I will say that there are a lot of transactions from the 1930s during the Great Depression because a lot of the people who came here worked in the federal government. They still
Right.
had jobs. They
Right.
could still purchase properties and come down here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is a good idea. It's something that could happen in the future.
At the corner of Fifth Street, across from the library, is now Raffert's Hairstyle, whatever. Is that the original farmhouse of the poor farmer that got,
It is not.
oh, it used
It
to be
i- it-
Richard's
it-
Florist?
Yeah, it's a later cottage that was built. I think the original farmhouse was actually right down the street here, down at the end on First Street. But I can't say that with any certainty. I haven't done the specific research into that. And maybe looking at the old maps will be able to tell me that answer. But it is not that house. Yes.
Have the street names changed over the years?
Yes, they have. There was Baltimore Street, there was Pittsburgh Street, there was Cleveland Street, lots of early big city names, and then they swapped it over later, basically to make it easier. First Street, Second Street, Third Street, and so on. Bay Avenue, Chesapeake Avenue, things like that. So yes, it has changed. If you come to the Bayside History Museum, we actually have a whole exhibit that talks about that. So make sure you visit the museum, and you can learn a lot of these changes. All right. Do we have time for one more question, or? Yes.
It was mostly a summer place. I mean, in terms of there was no heat, no air conditioning, things like that. So what percentage of the population do you think stayed year-round, or houses that were filled year-round?
So the only way that I could probably answer that question is through the census records, because that would show who was hanging around here in non-summer hours. There's no way to know that through the deed records because it just shows property owners. So that would probably be the best bet, was to go and combining it with census records is something that I plan to do, just so I can match it up and actually see where the census taker walked through the town, which I think would be pretty neat. All right. Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. All right. I tried to keep it up this year.
I could actually help you with that answer a little bit. I was born and raised here. So during the summer, we were absolutely bombarded, and during the winter, there would maybe be 300 or 400 people here in the late 50s and early 60s. So it dwindled to that few, and I could actually name the big, huge families that were here during that time because the city people, as we refer to them from the Washingtonians, all went back home. Yeah, thank goodness, no, we had the IGA here, which was wonderful. The Callises had that. I want to thank Vincent for today. I want to remind you in 2 weeks, we have the presentation for the 100-year anniversary of the North Beach Volunteer Fire Department. I also want to acknowledge our 3rd District Commissioner who supports our museum all the time. Thank you, Commissioner Guazzo, for coming today. And I forgot in my introductions that this talk was sponsored by the Bayside History Museum, the Calvert Library, and the Daughters of the American Revolution, the John Hanson local chapter. So thank you, everyone.